Hi, I'm Ben Pindar and I'm the PR Account Manager at Red Stag Media, and welcome back to another Agri Marketing Mastery. This week what we thought we'd do is look at top tips for international PR. And the reason for this is Red Stag Media does a fair amount of international PR, and we work with a number of international businesses who are trying to target the UK as well. So throughout my career I've been fortunate enough to work in a number of international markets delivering PR to different things, and that's ranged from the US through to the Far East, the Middle East as well, and even into Africa as well, which was a challenging market. So what we thought we'd do is just try and cover some of the top tips, the key considerations if you're looking to target international markets with your PR and communications. And it is worth saying at this point is it's a huge ask, it's a big task, is targeting international markets with PR. But if you apply some of these rules, it should hopefully help you to secure some coverage and start to make inroads into the markets you're targeting and helping to build your brand in that country. Right, so the first tip is focus. And the reason why I say this is it's a vast global market. There's 195 countries, and you need to essentially create a tailored approach to every single one. Much like you would in the UK if you're doing some regional PR, you tailor that content to each region of the UK. The same applies when you're trying to target a global market. So with the focus point, it's no good just getting a press release and trying to send it to 7 or 8 different countries. You need to focus your resources because it is going to take time, energy. You're going to have to tailor down your content. As we go through these tips, there's lots of other little things you've got to consider and steps you're going to take. So it's going to be a huge undertaking if you're trying to target multiple countries at once. So focus your resources, target a key market at a time, and make sure you're actually doing it properly and doing it effectively. So with that focus in mind, we'll start to go through some of these key tips. And the next one is understand the market. So you're focused where you're going. The key thing now is understanding what that market's about. And when I'm talking about understanding the market, it's understanding the media landscape. You know, where are you going to be targeting? Where are your press releases going to be going? What's the key media in that market? You know, every region's going to have different agricultural titles or different online outlets. It'll have different influencers if that's where you prefer to focus your attention. So you've got to really start to understand who's out there, who's saying what the best channel's going to be to get the biggest impact for what you're trying to do. And when I'm talking about understanding the market as well, it goes beyond that media landscape. You've got to understand what the challenges are for your target audience. You know, what are the challenges the growers are facing? Are there unique differences? They have a different approach to it. There's going to be a wealth of different things happening in that country, and you need to understand pretty well all of this to make sure you're going to land with a press release that's going to have a really big impact, because it's going to resonate. It shows you know where it's going, and because you know the market and the media landscape, you're going to get the biggest impact as well. Point 3 is make it local. And again, that's going back to that, if you're using the regional approach in the UK, you've got to understand that market and make it local and relevant to them. So I've listed comparisons, and one of the things for this is to help make it relevant in that local market. So it's all right to say you're the leading supplier of this in the north of England, but what does that mean to that market? Can you find a comparison? Is there a similar organisation, a similar situation or offer you can say, so you are an equivalent to that? Make it relevant, help them to understand what you're doing and why it's relevant that to market. Global issues, this is a really good easy access point to a degree. You know, global issues affect everybody, but the key thing to remember is it's going to affect everybody slightly differently. If you take climate change as an example, the impact of climate change here in the UK is going to be completely different to the impact of climate change in Northern Africa or the Middle East or wherever that needs to be. So you've got to understand that if you're trying to address this global issue, how is it relevant to that market? So again, make it local, drill it down to where it's going to have that impact. And then the most important one is make it local, use local people. If you've already got customers on the ground, make sure you've got some really good case studies about them, some quotes, show how they're using your product or service and delivering a big impact in that region. So make it really relevant. You can actually say, we're already working in this region, this is what the problem was before, this is how we've solved the solution, and this is the outcome. So make sure you're using local people. If you don't have customers on the ground, if you've got a good local representative, you know, the salesperson in country, use them, show you've got feet on the ground and you're actually having that local impact. You are part of the region you're targeting. Number 4 is relationships. And again, it's equally as important to have relationships with journalists as it is here in the UK. So actually go out there, you've already understood the market, who the key publications are, who's writing about what, so now start to reach out to those journalists. And you can do that through social media, obviously. Look at their social media channels. It might be you're targeting some key influencers, but actually reach out, speak to them, start to build those relationships, understand what they're writing about, what they're looking for, and then tailor your content to that. Deliver exactly what you need. If you make it easy for them, they're going to run the content. And relationships are hugely important in specific countries. Again, this comes back to understanding the market, and we're going to come to a little about that in the culture as well. But make sure you start to build those relationships. Don't be afraid to reach out, and it doesn't have to be every single one of these publications, but by starting to build some relationships with the journalists out there, you're going to get a better understanding of the market, what's going to tick the boxes, is it newsworthy, etc., etc. So you really start to build that rapport and start to develop content that's going to engage and get the coverage you want. Number 5 is distribution. So there's multiple ways to do this. And as I've said, by understanding the market and building those relationships, direct is going to be effective. It's time consuming. You've got to do your research. You've got to dig out the emails or the phone numbers or the social media profiles, however you're going to deliver that content, that PR pitch, that story to the market. But direct has impact. You can actually go direct into those inboxes. You've got those contact details, so it's easier to follow up and chase and find out if it didn't work, why they didn't like it, do they need something else, and as you would anywhere else in the world. So make sure direct is a good channel. If you've got your top targets, go direct to them. The other option is using the wire or international distribution services. Now these are very effective. There's a number of players out there who offer this service. And essentially you give the press release to them, they'll build a good targeted list for you across that specific country or across a region of the world, and they will send it out for you. The drawbacks are, it's quite expensive. You could probably expect to spend 1,500 quid to use one of these just per press release. You will get better deals if you're sending multiple out. And it will also, it's just a general blast, so it will get picked up by a lot of scraper sites and things like that where there's maybe not as much value for you, but it does give you access to a big network of these target publications. Another drawback is you won't get their contact details. You'll see which titles it's going to, but you won't get the personal contact details, so it's harder to then follow up and try and get more or understand. And then the final option, as I've already said, it's something we do for international businesses here at Red Stag. They'll be based in another country, want to target the UK market, so they draw on our expertise, our relationships, our understanding of the UK market to actually make sure they're getting the best value in that market. So if you're struggling to understand the market, build these relationships, it's often worth considering using a local agency, and they may be able to just provide some advice and guidance, or they, as we do, obviously start to develop strategies, distribute your press release, go to some of the key people as well. So think about the best way to land in these key markets. Number 6 is culture, and this is so important. It comes back to understanding the market as I keep going to, but understanding the culture is absolutely key. It's so easy to take a blanket approach and it's just not going to resonate. Certain cultures, certain countries just have a completely different attitude, appetite to where the media is delivered. So you've got to tailor that content. And as I say, one of the first questions, is it newsworthy? What's newsworthy here might have zero news value in another region. So you've got to understand the culture of it. Do you need to translate it? English will go a long way. But in key markets, you do need to think about localising the language, translating the content, certainly with sales materials, video content, things like that. But you probably do need to think about translating the press release if it's going into a market where English isn't as widely spoken. Language and spellings, and this isn't about translation, this is understanding the local language and local differences in terms of spellings and things like that. And the reason why I say that is that a good example is the US. The US market their use of language and spellings can vary quite differently to UK English. But when it comes back to understanding the market and the culture, you can even see a difference from the East Coast of America to the West Coast. I worked with one brand out there and I had to write 2 completely different press releases for New York and for Los Angeles because the cultures are actually very different and the news value is slightly different again. So it's making sure you're tailoring it into it. Another good example is South America. In South America, they don't really get PR. It's actually a really hard sell to get a news story about your business into the South American media. They expect you to pay. So something like that, you're probably gonna have to put a little bit of budget behind it. And it can vary around the world. In China, there's a really big thing on relationships before they use your media, before they use your press release. It's about almost like an obligation. There is a Chinese phrase that escapes me, but you need those relationships to try and secure that coverage. So like in the UAE, that's something different. It's great to use local people and make it Emirati because there's a big push to really drive Emirati people forward. So think exactly, as I've said, about that focus. It's got to be relevant to that region. Make sure you understand the culture and the time zones as well. That's another great example. And different working patterns, different countries work different days. Make sure you're actually operating within their time zone, within the days they're working, because it's no good sending it in the middle of the night and then they reply instantly. You do respond for another 8 hours while you're asleep. Make sure you're hitting the market when it's active and you're there and relevant. And culture, I've put etc, because there's so many cultural foibles. You've got to go out there, understand the culture and make sure you're really tailoring it to exactly to your audience. As I've said, it's going back to being relevant, local, understanding the market. And then finally, number 7 is adapt. Inevitably, and I mean, the same can be said for, in your home market where you do PR. It's not always going to land straight away. Be prepared to adapt. You've got to fire your press release out. If it isn't working, come back to it. Speak to the people you've started to build the relationships with. Ask, why isn't this working? Why isn't it newsworthy? What do we need to do? Change your strategy. It is going to be a bit of a learning curve in some of these markets, so don't be afraid to get it a little bit wrong and then have to adapt and come back and do something more. So that is a very quick overview of how to conquer the world with PR. So if you need any advice or if you've got any questions, just get in touch and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.